I don't want to raise expectations on what I'm about to say after Rachel's very substantive and fact-based presentation and the professor's very philosophical and meaningful presentation. I come to you as a simple oil and gas man. I would have been on Jim's energy panel, except that it got moved to tomorrow. So I'm looking at it from the standpoint of an outsider coming from Washington, and also looking at it from an energy perspective. And I want to ask what might be a provocative question on a forum that's titled Black Sea Economic Forum. My question is the Black Sea really an economic region? Does it want to be? Should it be an economic region? When it comes to energy projects, that clearly affects the entire Black Sea region, I'm thinking about South Stream as an example. I'm thinking about Bosphorus bypass pipelines as an example. Are these subjects that gets discussed on a regional basis? Is there a forum for discussing such issues, and what are they? Or is this a region where these energy trade and energy economics is done on a strictly bilateral basis from one country to another country, without thinking too much about how they might affect neighbors and neighbors' interests? In the energy sector, we tend to think about things in terms of real-life projects. There are other regional organizations around the world that does energy projects. One thinks of the Nordic electricity network. One thinks of the ASEAN gas grid in Southeast Asia as real projects that where regions consider themselves think about the advantages of economic integration and what can be achieved. If it thought about it, if it acted more like a region than as individual economies or individual states. After all, this is a sector that benefits from economies of scale. The greater the market, the greater number of options that you might have, the greater economic efficiency or economic robustness of any infrastructure that you might want to build. But in order to act like a region, besides talking to each other, you would also need some harmonizations of the rules of the game, of regulation in the energy sphere, hopefully to international standards, which all countries in the region presumably aspires to. So that world-class players like Kraft Foods can play in the region, but this applies to the energy sector as well, and I do note that ExxonMobil is at this forum for some reason or another. So there must be interest in the Black Sea. It is an industry that relies on long-term investments, investments that have long-term payout periods, and therefore, by definition, requires stable and attractive investment conditions in order to go forward with these investments. And here, I think, to be perfectly candid and honest with the Ukrainian audience, one should think about Ukraine as a weak link in the energy sector in this region. The Deputy Prime Minister, who I was very impressed, was taking copious notes during the previous panel, made the statement that he heard from Shell that Ukraine can be self-sufficient in gas in 10 years' time. The problem with that statement is that you could have said that 10 years ago. You could have said that 20 years ago. 40 years ago, Ukraine was exporting gas to the Russian Republic. So clearly, it's not a matter of geology. Geology was never the problem. The problem was the policy environment. The problem was the conditions under which the energy industry has to operate in this country, and the investment conditions in particular. So I hope Ukraine is in the process of embarking on serious energy reform in a sustained manner, not for some short-term political expediency, but to have an engagement with its public to talk about why energy sector reform is necessary in order for that to be politically sustainable. You are in the middle of an election campaign in this country. I happen to come from a country that's also in the middle of an election campaign. And I dismay when I'm in Washington at the level of policy discourse in the election campaign. When it comes to energy sector reform, which I think most experts, Ukrainian or Western, would agree is very necessary in this country, I'm dismayed in the last couple of days that I have heard from people that it is completely absent as a subject in the current RADA election campaign. And how do you sustain a policy if that is the case? And this is particularly true in the case of the most painful reform that's necessary, which is pricing reform for gas and electricity. So as Rachel said, there are vulnerabilities, but that also means that the opportunities are great for improvement. And if Ukraine were to embark on serious energy reform, it is a great asset to the region because of its geography, because of its geology, because of its able workforce that's capable and have demonstrated their capabilities in the energy sector to contribute to regional economic integration and regional stability. But we have to start soon. Thank you for your attention.